This episode of Around the Oval is brought to you by Todd Pennington with Revolution Mortgage. Hey, Ohio State fans, Alex Gleitman here, back with another edition of Around the Oval, brought to you by Todd Pennington with Revolution Mortgage. I have our video wizard, Kevin Noon, here with us today. Ohio State spring ball is just about a week or two away. Spring practices are about to roll out as we enter into March, and it's kind of crazy, Kevin. I feel like we just finished the 2021 football season, and now we're already talking about what the 2022 football season will look like.
Yeah, well, it's a 365-day a year proposition, and you come back from the bowl game and you get a little bit of time, and then before you know it, it's mat drills, and you're getting put through the paces by Mickey Marotti and that staff, and then we get to spring football. But for those of us that do this for a living, that's good news because it gives us something to talk about there. Not that I don't enjoy talking about basketball, but oftentimes it's just me and Tony talking about that. So let's get to some football.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a lull period right now, but starting to get really exciting. Obviously, the guys have been through winter conditioning with Mickey Marotti, and you hear some things about how certain guys are doing, how they're developing, things like that. But what does that actually translate to on the field when they, you know, maybe even before they put on the pads and they start to go through actual real football drills and they put on the pads? Obviously, the spring game, April 16th in Ohio Stadium, will be a nice little display of some of the progress some of these guys made. So today's episode and the excitement of spring ball and just looking ahead to the 2022 season and the spring practices that are coming up, we're going to take a look at each of our five guys on this team who we think could surprise during spring ball. I'll kick it off. I'll start with the guy in the wide receiver room. I know a lot of people are expecting me to say Marvin Harrison Jr. We've obviously heard a lot about him since the Rose Bowl when he kind of had that 3 touchdown breakout performance. You see some of the stuff they put out on social media. It looks like he's an absolute athletic freak. In addition to the genetics and the high IQ and great personality, we know he has, and his father has kind of helped groom him too. But I'm going to go with another guy in the wide receiver room, Julian Fleming. I mean, this is do or die for Julian Fleming entering year 3. He's battled some injuries, obviously a ton of talent in the wide receiver room. With Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave leaving, there is a huge opportunity for Julian Fleming to blossom. I think he's working very, very hard, from what I understand, with Brian Hartline, Mickey Marotti, to not only get healthy, stay healthy, but also to maximize his potential, which, he was a little bit of a raw prospect coming out of high school. But I think entering year 3, this is do or die. He's either going to get it done and be a very productive college receiver with a chance to make the NFL after this year or after, the next 2 years, or he might have to look for a new home because there's a lot of talent in that wide receiver room, and they're going to play the best guys and not just give Julian Fleming the opportunity because he was a 5-star and one service had him as the number 1 overall player in the country. So I think Julian Fleming could have a breakout spring. I think he could surprise a lot of people and ultimately cement himself as a starting wide receiver on this football team, which is not a gimme by any means.
Yeah,
Kevin, who do you got?
yeah. I mean, with Fleming, being healthy is just such a huge key to that, and he seems to be getting there. And now or never. I'm going to go with somebody who's not going to get a huge window of time during their Ohio State career, and that's going to be transfer safety Tanner McAllister, who followed his coach Jim Knowles to Ohio State. It's kind of a one and done situation. You better do it now, and we're going to be seeing, Ohio State making some tweaks to its defense. We're not seeing them completely reinvent themselves, still kind of sticking in a 4-2-5 type of situation. McAllister understands his defense. I mean, he's played under Knowles for his career, so he's going to be super important. So, I mean, not only is he going to surprise people as somebody who understands this, but he's going to be so important as a teacher to a defense that is going to be drinking from a fire hose here. And the thing with McAllister is McAllister, like most Oklahoma State commits, not a 5-star, not like a 4-star. I mean, he's somebody who's just kind of self-made, who came in and just made it on his own. It'll be interesting to see what he looks like going against Ohio State's receivers, what he looks like around Ohio State's other defensive backs. But I think he's going to be somebody that's going to just come in and have a huge impact, and I think it's going to be very important for the final product.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a guy who knows the terminology, knows what Jim Knowles expects day in and day out. A veteran, he's been around. He started for multiple years in this system. Being able to show the younger guys at Ohio State what to do, where to be. He's going to be ahead of the curve this spring. So I definitely think you're going to see a strong performance there. My next guy, number two on my list, I'm going to stay on the offensive side of the ball. I'm going to go with tight end Joe Royer. I had heard he was really coming on in bowl practices. I honestly thought we might see him a little bit more in the Rose Bowl than what we did. They didn't use the tight ends all that much, and Jeremy Rucker chose not to opt out of that game. So not a huge opportunity there for Joe Royer, but I've heard that he's taken that momentum from the fall, carried it into winter conditioning. The tight end job with Rucker leaving is wide open. Yes, Mitch Rossi's back, but he's still more of a traditional fullback, kind of maybe that second blocking tight end. I think kind of that primary featured in the passing game tight end position. Is it G. Scott? Is it Joe Royer? Is it Sam Hart? Is it Bennett Christian? I think Joe Royer, huge opportunity. Ohio State's not going to use the tight end a ton. We say every year they are. I don't think they are.
No.
But when they do, they in the passing game. They need to be able to execute, and they certainly need to be able to execute in the blocking game. I think that's an area Joe Royer's grown tremendously in. So Joe Royer is number two on my watch list of five Buckeyes that could surprise this spring.
I'll stay on the offensive side of the ball, or I'll move to the offensive side of the ball, that is, and I'll say offensive guard Donovan Jackson, who's going into year two as a Buckeye. Now, what are things going to look like? You look at them replacing tackles. I mean, that's going to be a case of Paris Johnson's going to slide out to tackle from guard. That's going to open up a spot. Where's Harry Miller going to be? You've got Matt Jones, you got Harry Miller. I mean, what's going to be there? Donovan Jackson, I think, is too impressive of an athlete not to have out there at this point. He was a former 5-star out of the greater Houston area. I think he's going to be somebody that's going to be the next great lineman at Ohio State. I know we don't put as much onus on guards or just interior linemen in general. I mean, tackle's kind of the money position there. But I think Donovan Jackson's a guy that has a 10-year NFL career ahead of him. So I think they're going to be able to start that cycle here at this point. What that ends up meaning for everybody else in terms of what happens with Matt Jones and Harry Miller, I can't speak for that. But at this point, I'm backing Donovan as somebody that has to play, and I think he's going to have a very strong spring.
Yeah, I'll stay on offensive line. There's a lot of offensive linemen I consider. Donovan Jackson. I think Enoch Vimahi could have a big spring. Josh Fryer could have a big spring. I think Matt Jones, to be honest, I think he's honestly solidified at left guard. I've heard only great things about him, and I know he's kind of a man on a mission. He was the sixth man last year, so I think he's going to get one of those jobs. I think he's going to do really well. I'm actually going with Harry Miller as my third choice. It's some people might question him being a surprise, but for a guy who started 2 years ago and was a highly regarded recruit, was supposed to start last year, but there was some off-field things he was dealing with, and then he came back, and then there was an injury that ended his season. So we never really got to see what Harry Miller was in year three of his Ohio State career. I think he is very determined mentally, physically, to get back and show people that he is the player that they always thought he was. What people don't know, 2 years ago, they didn't love him when he started for Ohio State at guard. I'm not going to sit here and defend him. He didn't have the best year, but I know he also played through a torn shoulder for most of that year, which certainly would impact your game. And he had surgery last offseason, which obviously set him back even more. So I think there's a lot of things this kid has gone through, but I think if anyone is maybe built to overcome the challenges, I think it's Harry Miller. I won't be shocked if he's starting at guard. I won't be shocked if he's starting at center. Again, what does that mean for Luke Whippler, Donovan Jackson, some of the other guys in there? I don't know. But I think Harry Miller. I believe in Harry Miller, and he's my number three guy to watch this spring.
I'm going to jump to the other side of the line, to the defensive line. I kind of went round and round here. And can somebody who had 3 sacks in a game be somebody that qualifies for this list? Sure, why not? Tyleik Williams, come on down. I'm going to say Tyleik Williams is going to have a big spring. I think this is going to be huge for him. I mean, he got a taste of what college action is. He got a taste of what college success is, but it was very inconsistent of, how many reps he would get. I mean, what his impact would be. I think that this is going to be the year. I think that Ohio State is going to be making enough changes in terms of what the defense is fundamentally that some of the aggression type of numbers are going to be able to go up. And I think Tyleik Williams is going to be somebody who's going to be able to benefit from that greatly. While he certainly has time on the back end of his career, he's not somebody who's up against a deadline, whereas Tanner McAllister may be, or some of these other older guys that we've talked about. I think Tyleik is somebody that's going to be that could have a huge spring.
Yeah, he was in consideration for my list. My fourth guy, though, is going to be another second year defensive tackle, a guy who got his he redshirted last year, got his season cut a little bit short as he was just starting to come on and burst onto the scene, and that's Michael Hall, who will be, I guess, technically a redshirt freshman out of the Northeast Ohio area. Mike Hall, I've heard great things about him since he got on campus. He started to, as we said, break through, maybe start to crack into the rotation last year, and then suffered an injury that kind of cost him the rest of the year. But he's back. He's ready to go. I've heard that Ohio State and Larry Johnson expect big things from him. I think Michael Hall. I know. Look, Jerron Cage, Teron Vincent are the veterans. I do think Tyleik Williams is going to have a big time year. But I think Mike Hall, with his athleticism, his ability to use leverage, get below pad level, things like that. I think a big year is coming for Mike Hall. Kind of a nice little breakout season, and then maybe year three. I mean, him and Tyleik Williams might be an unstoppable force in their third years on the interior.
I'm going to go back to the secondary, and I'm going to say Jalen Johnson or J.K. Johnson, depending on how you want to go there. I'm going to admit I did not think that Denzel Burke would be the first one to emerge from that group of talented defensive backs. I figured it would have been Jalen Johnson. Well, it didn't happen. I mean, you had Burke, you had him, you had Jordan Hancock. I mean, you certainly had a lot of candidates there. I mean, I probably could have picked most of my list just from the secondary, but I think Jalen Johnson is going to be the guy that's going to step up into that number two role in terms of being behind Denzel Burke and Cameron Brown. I think he's going to force Ohio State's hand to play him some. I don't think we're going to see as much rotation in terms of, well, we've got three corners that should be starters, so we're going to play three or four. I mean, I think that was something more of predecessors. I mean, now it's a Jim Knowles led defense. You got Perry Aliano, you got Tim Walton back there. We don't necessarily know exactly what their mantra is, but I think Jalen Johnson and Jordan Hancock, by extension, I think they're going to make it very difficult to keep them off the field, especially as Ohio State knows what happens when you don't have these guys getting out there and getting reps, and then you're bringing in guys who are relatively green to start seasons. And while Ohio State opens against Notre Dame this year, what happens when Cameron Brown moves on, and next year you got Notre Dame at Notre Dame pretty early in the season as well?
Yeah, I thought about one of the freshman corners. I ended up going my fifth and final choice with the linebacker group. I just think that group underperformed so much the last few years, especially last year. Definitely a weakness of the defense. But I think with Jim Knowles personally coaching that position unit with his system, I think with just there's going to be more structure, and people are just going to know they're going to take these freak athletes and they're going to know where they're actually supposed to be and where they go and play with less thinking and more reacting. I think in his system, see ball, get ball. And I think that's really going to benefit the linebackers. And so I mean, there's a number of guys that I think could benefit from that. But I'm going to go when we talk about surprises a little bit. I think when you talk about a pure athlete who might just benefit from a very simple see ball, get ball, know your role, know your responsibility. It's a transfer. Chip Trainum, Diamante Trainum, former Akron Hoban two-way star, running back and linebacker, went to Arizona State his first couple of years, was actually a pretty good college running back, but I think he kind of saw the light, and a lot of people, as you know, are getting out of Arizona State for a variety of reasons. But I think Chip was probably looking at his long-term potential. And yes, could he make the NFL as a running back? Yes, he could. But I think the upside for him is as a defensive player, using his athleticism, using his toughness, using his speed, to be able to make plays on the defensive side of the ball. And I think he made a very wise decision coming to Ohio State to come play linebacker. I think there will be a learning curve. I think he's definitely going to go through some growing pains this spring and probably into the season. But I think just the level of athlete that he is, he's going to be around the ball a lot. I think he's going to be making a lot of plays. A really smart football player, high football IQ type of guy, definitely a leader type of guy for that locker room and for that unit. And so he's my fifth and final guy for players who I think could surprise for Ohio State this spring.
I'm going to stay in the linebacker room too with a former defensive player, and I'm going to say Cade Stover. And I think it's going to be important for Cade Stover to have a whole off season of preparation at linebacker, a position that he seems built to play. We've seen Ohio State have success moving Steel Chambers from running back to linebacker. They're hoping to have success moving Chip Trainum from running back to linebacker. Cade Stover comes in as a defensive lineman, moves over to tight end. Then at the end of the year, out of necessity, they move him over to linebacker. I mean, he ends up having a pretty strong game in the Rose Bowl against Utah. I think that talking about see ball, get ball, that is going to be Cade Stover, and that's not saying that Cade Stover can't do other things. That's not saying that he can't drop into coverage and do things against opposing talented tight ends or whatnot. But that's not necessarily what his game is. He's a thumper out there, and I think he's going to be somebody that is going to do very well in this system. And I just think the consistency of this is your position, and come hell or high water, we're not moving you. This is where you're going to be. Is subject until his next position change, but hopefully there isn't another position change coming in. And I just think that having this whole off season, being able to focus on the one position and doing that, I think it's going to bode very well. And it's going to be very difficult for him not to have a role. But then again, what does it look like in a 4-2-5 if you don't necessarily have a Sam out there? I don't know. So we'll see there. I think that might be the biggest limitation on what Cade Stover can do. Just lack of opportunities maybe under certain structural considerations.
Yeah, I think Stover's a great choice. He's one I would consider, but I think we both agree the linebacker group is one that is going to benefit from all the different coaching changes and the new system on that side of the ball. Kevin, thanks for joining me. Listeners, thanks for joining us as well. Hopefully, this gave you a nice little preview for what we hope to see over the next few weeks, next couple months of spring ball as Ohio State goes through that in March, and then concludes it with the spring game on April 16th. Be sure to tune in to Around the Oval on YouTube, all of our different podcast platforms. Check us out each and every week, talking about Ohio State football, basketball, recruiting, having special guests from time to time. We'll keep you posted with everything you need to know. And be sure to keep close to BuckeyeScoop.com for all the coverage of the Buckeyes basketball team as they head into the conference tournament and March Madness, as well as for the football team as they head into spring ball as we head toward that April 16th spring game. Again, I'm Alex Gleitman for Around the Oval, brought to you by Todd Pennington with Revolution Mortgage. Thanks, and we'll see you next week. This episode of Around the Oval was brought to you by Todd Pennington with Revolution Mortgage. If you've been thinking about refinancing or buying a house, check out our sponsor, Todd Pennington with Revolution Mortgage. They offer low rates for refinancing and home purchase loans, including first-time home buyer programs, down payment assistance, and cash out home equity loans. Check out revolutionmortgage.com/tpennington.